Hi everyone, welcome to the Mind Blown Zone, episode 33. This is the Flat Earth debate, part 2. How you doing, Brad?
I am never better. And yourself.
Well, just sensationally great today.
That's good to hear. Fantastic.
Feeling
What we
good.
got going on? What's happening today?
Okay, wanted to just do a quick, just tiny quick refresher on just where we finished off last time. We were talking about how when you present evidence to people, when you just point out like, well, what about this thing? Whether it's like there's this inconsistency with the globe model, or here's this interesting thing that points to maybe it's flat or something like that. We looked at the curvature from a plane, how Neil deGrasse Tyson has admitted that you can't see it, and yet people think that you can. We talked about how there's no good evidence of the existence of Antarctica. We talked about how GPS is a closed source code run by the US military. We talked about how difficult it is to get flights that go along the lines of latitude in the southern hemisphere. And we
Yeah,
kind of started to talk about how when you bring these things up, there's a bit of a strange reaction. Did you want to summarize what that reaction is like, Brad?
sure. And I just wanted to add to your list the questionable videos and images from NASA and their trustworthiness is also a biggie in that list of items that people hear but don't necessarily believe. So yeah, why can't people accept or acknowledge this evidence, kind of at first glance? I think that's what's most interesting. And just before this
Mm.
podcast, Matt and I were talking, and I said I've probably mentioned flat earth to 100 people over the past couple of years, and the reactions are pretty much always the same. And in the rare case where you get to talk about it for a few minutes, or they ask a couple of questions and you give them the answers, there's this almost immediate shutdown of some sort, whether they want to call you crazy or a conspiracy theorist, or they just want to drop the subject because they don't know how to respond when you tell them, well, yeah, in fact, this is the truth of the matter, which goes against what we've all been taught. So one of the first points I wanted to make was that I don't think I've ever had anybody respond to me saying, well, that's really fascinating, tell me more, or I'm going to go do some research, where can you point me to, right? I don't think that's really ever happened in my interactions with people. How about you? Have you had anything like that, Matt?
I would say that mine is a little bit like, I guess I have a bit of a reputation among people I know that I explain stuff really well. And when I speak, it always sounds like it makes sense. So if I bring up something like that, it always seems like they have to go somewhere. Or
Yeah. Right. I
they're,
think
they're like, oh shit, Matt's gonna barrage me with something, and I'm gonna question my whole reality. So I gotta run away right now.
yeah, that's pretty much par for the course for me too. I think we both had a few family members that gave us a listen. I mean, they didn't say, "Oh, wow, okay, you must be right." Like that's impossible for anybody to come from it after hearing about it for the first time or getting a few of their questions answered. But so that's what's the cause of that? And I think a big thing is kind of in our human programming, if you will, there is a definite fear of the unknown that people have. And I think flat earth causes, flicks that trigger, if you will, in people because, they, they have been living on this planet all their life. And as far as they know, it's a ball floating in space. And you tell them that none of that's true. It's almost like you're shaking you're rocking the ground that they're standing on. Right. And
Hmm.
I think that's it's a deep pro. No one says, hey, well, I don't know that. Well, that scares me because then I don't know where I'm at, and that freaks me out. But I think that's going on in the background. Uh, Probably number one, uh, if I had to guess. And another thing is just this, our lifelong indoctrination into the globe model. This goes way back to one of our early podcasts we called belief imprinting. And I think this is a biggie. We'll talk about that in a second, but we get introduced to the globe and the planets and the solar system, nursery school, kindergarten, first grade. So there's definitely some of that going on, the duckling imprinting on the human kind of thing, right?
Hmm.
Um, when it comes to people that are a little more invested in anything related to cosmology, astrophysics, space travel, science fiction, and people that have some degree of interest in that, whether it's a career or you just, they're into Star Wars and Star Trek and all of that. One of the things that we hear a lot, and I guess by we, I mean the people who are out there, proponents of flat Earth, is the people that they interact with, the physicists, the mathematicians, the cosmologists. What they eventually come to is they need a replacement model for their existing perfect mathematical model that has been built for them. So that, all of their questions are, well, okay, if this isn't this and this aren't true, then tell me what is true. And when they hear, well, we don't know, we don't have enough information to say what is true, how far the sun is, or how far Venus is, or what the size of Venus is, or any of these kinds of questions, we don't know the answer to that. So because we don't have a replacement model to give to the person who's invested in the existing model, they shut down almost immediately. And
Hmm.
and it's more or less their refrain. Well, when you guys come up with a perfect working mathematical model, get back to me. Until then, I'm sticking with the globe. And what
Right.
those people don't realize, of course, is that's all they have is a mathematical model that's based on assumptions and unfalsifiable claims out the yin yang. So you point those out to them, and it just doesn't make them budge an inch. They don't budge. It's basically what it comes down to. Uh,
And I would have been in that camp, right? I was in that replacement model camp because I have,
yeah,
I studied 4 years of engineering, aeronautical engineering. We studied space, right? We studied the atmosphere. We studied planes flying around the world, right?
sure.
Like,
You're a rocket
so
scientist
I
for crying
had
out loud.
the whole model, right? I even studied physics, like I had the whole model. And I was
Right.
always watching all those PBS space time and stuff like that. And, you know, so, but what was interesting is that if you don't give up straight away, right? If you don't go, oh, it's probably bullshit. I'm not even going to look at that because I'm scared. Then you start to find out that even though there isn't yet a complete perfect replacement model, there's explanations for a lot of things, a lot. And you can, after you hear those explanations, you can even go and look at reality and go, you know what? It actually does look like that. For example, one of the parts of the model is that the sun is, okay, if you've got this flat circle as the earth, then you got the sun kind of moving around on top. And so that would imply that, the sun is staying at a constant height. And when it's, passing over you, it's not that the idea is that you're not like rotating and the sun's staying there and you're going, whoa, yeah, I'm like, I see the sun and then I don't. It's actually moving above you. And then you go and watch, say, videos of the sun moving on the ultra flat Mongolian steppes and you watch the sun move and you just look at it and it's like, whoa, that really looks like it's just moving away. So I think my point there is the replacement models that are getting better and better and they actually fit it pretty well in line with reality, which is pretty weird.
Yeah, it's just not all perfectly laid out in a 3,000 page textbook, from A to Z.
Right.
So if there's one gap in
Right.
there, then it's not a replacement model yet. What's interesting?
Right.
I don't think we mentioned this, and if we did, you can remind me. But I would say, you know, 99% of the people who are the flat Earth proponents out there today, right? The big voices in the space that are pushing content, and I'll include myself in this list, and I'll bet you we can include Matt in this list too. Was when we heard about flat Earth, we set out to debunk it effectively when someone was pushing us, right? And that's what all these flat earth researchers did too. They thought it was a stupid idea, but someone was bugging them about it. And they said, I'm going to go prove this guy wrong. And they bought a Nikon telephoto lens camera or, ran off to find the experiments that proved the globe. And they all of them, of course, arrived at the same conclusion, which was, oh my gosh, this globe model thing is totally wrong. So
Right. Well, you were the one that told me, and I was like, okay, so this guy's a bit
yeah, that was early on in
bit
our
kooky or something.
conversations.
Like,
Yeah,
fair enough. Like, it's okay. Like, believes in that stuff. Like, I wonder what I could, like, what would be the ultimate thing that I could look at. And yeah, it was Antarctica, and I was like, well, let's see. If there's good video of Antarctica from space, then it's bunk.
right,
But I
right.
looked it up, and there is no good video from Antarctica from space, and there's not even good images. There's only explanations of why they can't get video, and I was like, well, there's at least something to it.
Yeah, that's how it starts, right? You go, I can't disprove this thing here, and obviously we talked about it in the previous podcast that for those of you who don't want to trust anybody, you can get yourself one of these Nikon P1900 cameras, and you can at least go see boats and oil rigs and things way offshore that you can't see with your naked eye, and that's got to make you scratch your head a little bit because that breaks the model that we've been taught. So
Mm.
moving along here, what do we have next? Why we
This
never
mass
question
belief
things?
idea.
Uh,
It's difficult to not accept because of this mass belief egregore, as you refer to it.
yeah, it's the go along to get along model. So nobody wants to be the weirdo that believes in flat Earth, right? You stand out, in the conversation or from the crowd. So that's the pressure to just go along to get along is also tremendous. Sorry, I missed that one. So yep, that's a biggie.
Oh, okay, so we're gonna dive a bit deeper into some of these points. Um, there's a thing here that's why, like, what's happening is that just now, as people are adults, like, could be over 30 or even older, the idea is like for the first time coming to them, hey, have you considered that the Earth could be flat, right? And it's interesting that that would only happen at kind of later stages in life, and it points to this question, like, why didn't that get considered earlier on? Do you want to take us into some of this content, Brad?
Well, yeah. So, I think the first bullet here is, of course, early childhood indoctrination. And, there's a saying from the Jesuits who are basically in charge of the global education and religions for those who want to dig deep enough. At least some of them are, not the majority, but the ones at the top of the rung who handle this kind of thing. But they have a little saying that, allow me to teach a child until they're 7 and I'll show you the man. And that kind of harmonizes real nicely with what Rudolf Steiner says, which is that that up until age 7, the child is basically a sponge. They're not thinking for themselves hardly at all, right? They're not critical thinking. They're just there to learn, the language and how to interact and how to socialize and all that kind of thing. So whatever you tell them goes unchallenged, and the more you remind them of these things, and the more that they hear them, the more it settles into their belief system. So that's
And
huge.
can I clarify the meaning of this quote? So it says, okay, allow me to teach a child until age 7 and I'll show you the man. Is the meaning of that they can choose the man or woman that they want the child to become?
Yeah, they're saying I'll tell you what that man believes, at age 50 or whatever, based on what the first 7 years of his education were.
So they could choose what he wants to believe, what they want what they want the masses to believe at age 50. And if they're just like, well, we want them to believe that, okay, so let's sculpt an education program and that'll cause it.
That's right. Yep. And
Easy.
yep, it's very easy. And again, everybody wants to go along to get along, and it's hard to release a belief imprint and all the rest of the stuff we've talked about. So this is a huge, comes into play. And we made a few notes here. The kindergarten, nursery school, first grade models and posters. Posters at home, Sesame Street. It was a big program here in the United States. Anyway, it used to be and they do a ton of stuff with NASA and the planets, and so you're getting it coming and going. Um, and this is why, right? This is the belief imprinting going on, trying to get these kids, up through second and third grade. You don't need to pound it in as much after that's been done the first 7 years.
Right.
Uh,
Well,
uh,
imagine you do like a model of the science of the solar system for your second grade,
yeah,
science
diorama,
project. And you have
right?
this like really, great time with your parents building it, like that's in there as a memory that you'll have to go through,
Yeah,
smash apart to consider other possibilities.
right. So yeah, it's huge. And like I said, there's no way to disprove the globe, right? Or prove, flatness in any definitive way without the support of massive institutions. So it's easy to dismiss. I call it an instant dismissal. And, this is comes from a lot of different directions, but goes back to the most common one when you bring up any conspiracy theories, that too many people would have to be in on it. Which is, if I had a nickel for every time I've heard that, and we talked a little bit about the Gene Kranz thing with the simulation models that the NASA team used were identical to the real missions of the Apollo missions with back in the 60s and 70s, of course. So it's easy to instantly dismiss things for all those reasons we've talked about. And I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I just wanted to point at that telescope thing again. How that, because you raised this, too many people would have to be in it, right? So, all the data for like space comes from the telescopes, right?
Right.
And you think that, okay, all those like academic teams of, PhD students are like going and using the telescopes and they're getting the data from space. It's coming in and they're like recording it and then they're like analyzing it. They're like figuring it out. But I mean, you pointed out to me, well, who owns the telescopes?
Mm.
And I was like, well, I don't know. Who owns the telescopes? I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like the universities own them, or and then I find out it's just international consortium. If that's how you pronounce that word, but just big international groups own them. And you said, well, it's the Vatican. I don't know about that, but at least ChatGPT told me like it's just big unknown international groups of people, and I was like, well, how do I know that when they make the telescopes, they're not just putting in data, and when people go and use it and get data out of it, how do you know that's really from little photons hitting the telescope, and it's not just the programming of the telescope coming in? And that's the same thing with the NASA moon landing. It's not, oh, they're all in on it, but how do they really know that? How do those engineers know that they're not just being fed data from simulations? They don't. They
Right.
can't see it, So this idea of like so many people would need to be in on it. No, not really. Not really.
Yeah, it's the same. It's software. It's a lot of programming too, just like the closed source GPS, right? Those telescopes all carry the same data sets. Let's say this thing you see
Right.
here is 7 light years away, and this thing here is 48 zillion miles away, and so that's their starting point is we've programmed in all the distances to the known stars and galaxies. So when the people are looking through it, they just assume that's all true, and then they make their findings and base their calculations based on all those previous values, right?
Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to say for 100% that's like it is, but we, as just the regular people who didn't build a telescope and haven't used a telescope, we have no idea where that data really comes from. And you can't pretend that you do. You just can't.
That's right. That's right. So not that many people would have to be in on it. That's the conclusion.
Right.
That's great. All right. What's
So there's
next?
this fear of not knowing idea. People get uncomfortable when they think they know something and you tell them they're wrong, but can't show them what's right. That was your point, Brad. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. Well, that goes to a lot of different areas, and maybe the best example of that is going over to the virus thing. And a lot of the guys who found the who did all the research and really nailed down the fake boogeyman virus thing are still in the in the terrain theory crowd, and I've watched them have conversations with people or listen to them talk about their conversations, and they always seem to die at, all right, well, if viruses don't cause this disease or that disease, then what does? And they don't have the answer. They say, well, it could be environmental factors and toxins in your food and electricity, all the things that they postulate. But it's a conversation killer. right? It just stops the
Yeah.
person in their tracks. They say, well, if you can't even tell me what causes the flu, then I can't listen to you anymore because you're just speculating and you don't know. And this virus thing
Mm.
makes a lot of sense because that's what I've been told my whole life. So that's a good example that not only are they uncomfortable, but they shut down when you can't hand them the correct answer. And that's
Yep.
going on tremendously in the globe versus flat Earth debates right now. Is it's like, okay, well, you've made a few good points over there, but you haven't convinced me because you can't tell me how far the sun is, right? And so that's the end of the
Yeah.
conversation. And what's really going on in that background, though, is fear, right? These people can't accept that they've been deceived, and that may be the big picture. Is if they can lie about something this big, then what else could they lie about? And that's probably a pretty unsettling thought to a lot of people.
Yeah. Like if you're bringing up, suddenly you're being commanded by people who are 100% into the globe. You're being commanded to sail to Antarctica and check it out, or fly there. People are telling, if I just, I have a little comment war on TikTok or YouTube or something like that, people are telling me to go get a plane and fly to Antarctica to prove it to them. And only then will they accept it. I'm like, well, can't you at least take the point that there are no flights like from Sydney over to Johannesburg or, around Buenos Aires and stuff like that? Like, can't you at least just take that and let that be something? Like, have some meaning? Like, I don't want you to drop your beliefs and come with
Right.
me 100%, but like, just let it be something. They're like, no, no, you get a plane and fly to Antarctica and look at it and get video and prove it to me. Like, show me the ice wall. Like, jeez.
Yeah, that's where you're at. That's where we're at. And it's a point I made in the previous podcast. I'm not sure which one, but that, if you can answer 19 out of 20 or 99 out of 100 of their questions, but there's one lingering, then they're going to stick with where they're at. Oh, you can't explain the ISS perfectly to me? All right, well, then you're wrong. And
Right.
that's another one
And that's a tough one. You and I have discussed that.
it is a
Like,
toughie.
we're like, man, what's with that ISS? Like, how do they do that? How do
It,
they get it to? I even emailed Eric Dubay
that's right.
and I asked him, what's your thing? And he emailed me back and said something. I was like, it doesn't sound right. So I don't think anyone out there has a good explanation of that.
Oh, actually, I sent you that short TikTok video. That guy put, basically he was speculating if they have this technology and know how to do this now, then this is how they do it. And he showed how it made like that tetrahedron pattern or whatever. I can't remember what the word is, but he showed how this is what the flight path would look like if you had this advanced technology where you could simulate this, and it looks
Yeah.
identical to the ISS paths. That was interesting. I don't know if he's right, but that was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the thing for me so far is just like, well, how do you get that? Like, we don't know anything. We, the public, don't know anything that can go that fast. Right.
Right.
So it's like, according to our present knowledge, we don't know, or that doesn't make sense to us. Therefore, I refuse to even contemplate the possibility.
Right.
Like,
And
nope, doesn't fit with present knowledge of the collective. So I will not consider this.
just a side note too, not just a couple of weeks ago, somebody came out with a video, and I didn't know this at the time. I don't know whether it was well known or not, but they have an exact replica, down to the screws and washers of the ISS in Houston. It's literally it's supposed to be an identical replica of the thing that's supposed to be in space that nobody ever saw being built, or, no video of it ever being shown, taken up to space. Right. But so
Right. And of course, the objection would be, well, obviously you need to train somewhere, but do you really need an identical replica with every single little switch
right,
and
right.
wire and everything? Does it need to look exactly the same?
Yeah, right. It looks
I would say
exactly
no,
like
right?
all the videos we see of the supposed astronauts on the ISS, of course, right? You couldn't tell the difference.
Right.
So that's fishy. Anyway, we're going off on a tangent there. But yeah, these are just some of the things. I guess the last point there is, it is unsettling. I totally agree when people react in this way. When you think about, well, what exactly are we standing on here then? Like, what's the Earth standing on? Right? It's a good question, right?
Right.
Like, what's holding Earth
Right.
up then if it's not floating in space by gravity? And we don't know.
I think people love the science stuff for that. That's why the globe stuff is loved because they have, they got there first. And they've been working on it for thousands of years and they got a full explanation that took thousands of years to develop. They got an answer for everything, right? Everything you can, well, except for, okay, what's your dark matter, bro? What's your graviton?
You're right.
What's your dark energy? Where did the Big Bang come from? What was there before that? They don't have any answers to that, right? But they got all the typical kind of things that people would generally ask, right?
Yeah. Well, it's
And, for those harder things like dark matter, it's like, well, that's evolving science. So
right.
just we'll get the answers soon.
It's the classic saying, and I don't know who made the quote, but it's a perfect one, which is like, allow me just one assumption and I can explain anything to you. So of course
Mhm.
the globe model people have thousands of assumptions built into their framework, but once you accept all thousand, then they can give you any explanation you want, and it makes sense based on those assumptions.
Right. Like if you accept gravity without any graviton, then you're good, right?
Well, that's part of it for sure. I mean, there's a million assumptions. We could spend 10 podcasts going over all of them, but they're all assumed to be true, right? That the sun's 93 million miles away and it's a giant ball of hydrogen gas burning, and it sends us heat, and none of those things are true.
Well,
Verifiably
my
untrue.
favorite one is the dark matter and dark energy
Yeah.
because
Well,
it's like, well, there's all this movement that we don't really know, right? But hear me out. If there was this matter and energy that was here, and here, and it acted exactly like this and caused things in this way, then that would actually explain everything.
exactly.
It's like, oh, okay, fantastic. I guess that's the nature of the dark matter, and it's really there.
Yeah. Right. When the
That's
scientists
so absurd to me.
in the 20s and 30s started to apply Einsteinian relativity and all in Einsteinian gravity to what they were looking at, they quickly found in the early 1930s that none of it worked. It's like you can't explain how those bodies are moving based on the mass that's there. And so they just quickly made up 96% of everything out there is stuff we don't know what it is and we can't see it or find it. And
Yeah,
once they did that,
imagine that.
we're back
Imagine
to
having 96% of everything just made up as an idea, but then pretending that all that stuff points to a Big Bang exactly 13 point, okay, fine, 6 or 7 billion years ago.
the
That
whole thing
is
collapses.
hilarious.
Right. The whole thing collapses with just a few of these assumptions. But yeah, they're everywhere. So that's a problem. What do we got next here?
Right.
Replacement model. What are we
And
doing
if I can
here?
just mention real quick, if I can just tie this back in, the reason we're discussing this is like, at least they've got a model, right? Flat Earth don't have no model
Well,
of
no,
the whole
there is.
universe.
No, no, there
Not
are.
not not that developed, right?
Yeah, they've got a good model of Earth, right? That's what they've
Right.
got solidly right now. But when it comes to celestial bodies, right, it's all speculation,
Right.
and it may be that way forever, right? Who's to say if we'll be able to ever be able to figure out how far away this is or how big that is, and so on and so forth? It may be beyond our capabilities. We may not be supposed to learn that kind of thing, right? It's not
Mhm.
important for us to know. Anyway,
So
that
we kind of
means
covered this list here, Brad. Venus, Greek math, Doppler, and redshift. Did you want to mention anything there more?
well, I think we're just still on on replacement model.
Mhm.
These are just some of the assumptions that people make. I don't know that we touched on most of those actually, but I guess I was poking at them a little bit there. Oh, okay, yeah, I guess we were doing those. Well, yeah, basically the entire mathematical model, just so people understand this, it's worth knowing, is that somebody decided that Venus was the same size as Earth. Who decided that? I don't know. How they decided that? I don't know. But it was a convenient thing to decide because when we were able to see Venus transiting the sun, they, using that assumption, that's how they built the cosmological model, basically. So they said, well, okay, if that's the case, then here's Venus in front of the sun, so we can now calculate the size of the sun, and then we calculate the distance based on this and this and this, and everything flows from that basic assumption, which has no
Right.
no. It's an unfalsifiable claim that Venus is about the same size as Earth.
Well, see that's the difficulty as well because you say unfalsifiable, but the belief in the collective is that there really are spaceships that have gone out and done flybys of Venus and beamed data back to Earth, right?
Right.
No,
That's
no single person in the collective, just John on the street, has ever gone to Venus and looked at Venus. They're just taking the word of a government agency, like basically the least trustworthy group of people ever to exist.
that's
And
right.
yeah, everybody does it.
And it's like, how do they measure it exactly? What do they measure it against? Right. There's like a million questions you have. All right. So let's pretend that they did send a satellite out there and they were able to orbit it and everything else. Like, how do you measure a planet exactly? Anyway, it's
Well,
all,
they would say, see, there's always an explanation, right? Well,
of
we
course.
know exactly where the spaceship is, right? We pointed it there. Plus, we calculated exactly where Venus was supposed to be, and everything's going as normal. And yeah, as we got close to it, it looked exactly as big as we thought it would be. And then we went by it and we did some trigonometry based on our movement by it, and it all worked out. It was all
Right.
perfect,
Yeah.
exactly as we expected. So the math checks out.
Right. And yeah, I'm just saying the basic question is how did you arrive at this value and that value and this value, right? So that's so that you can start to poke holes in things. But once they
Mm,
give you that information that it's the same size as Earth, then they can go and do
right.
all their other stuff to build their model. The other thing I just want to talk about
Yeah.
the Doppler and redshift stuff. They're totally wrong about how it works and why something turns red and shifts red and blue, and it's a complicated topic, but this is how they get all the way out there stuff, the Crab Nebulas and the Plutos and Alpha Centauri and all the rest. They use this redshift idea to say, all right, well, if it shifts X amount, then it's this many light years away. And again, it's all just made up stuff, basically, that they're not right about.
Is there some counter explanation for why more things are observed red or et cetera, et cetera,
There is, but
in
we're
the
not.
sky?
It's a long drawn out discussion to even start this up. I'm just throwing it out there that these are what they use to claim these
Hmm.
unbelievable distances. Right? Can you imagine? Maybe one of the easiest ways to think about all this is imagine the most powerful spotlight you can think of, right? And how much distance it covers before you can't see it any longer. A couple miles maybe. Um, light doesn't travel forever like they say it does. We have no evidence of that here on Earth. So, oh, you just can't produce a light that's strong enough or big enough. It's provable that there's no way that light could travel for 50 trillion miles. I mean, it would be the most ridiculous light. It should just basically zap everything that it touches, right? Because it would be such a powerful light. So how in the world can light come from 50 trillion miles away and we were able to see it? Does that make any sense?
Well, I mean, what they say is that we just pick up just, there's so many, these stars, and they emit so many photons. And then our big telescopes to just catch a photon, like boom, a
Right.
photon hit.
They
And
can't.
statistically, we were able to,
Well, forget
count up all the photons that hit and that indicates this, right? But
forgetting
pretty
telescopes
dodgy.
and non-existent photons for a moment. You just go out and look at the night sky. Like, how can I see how can I see a star that's 50 trillion miles away? How is that possible? When the strongest, spotlight we can make in the world can only go 10 miles or whatever, right? Just, think of 10 miles and 50 trillion. You can't even compare the two.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the idea. Why it's
Well, you just got
obvious.
to say that everything's really big and really bright.
Yeah. So it should be basically wiping each other out, along the way. Anyway, let's not go down that path any further. But yeah, those are just some of the many assumptions that are out there. And when you just kind of stop and think about it, right? There's the half distance, light. I forget. I'm not going to say the correct math to it, but for every, you know, for every, whatever mile that you travel, the distance, the brightness of an object is cut in half. And, each additional, whatever, 1,000 feet, it gets cut in half and cut in half and cut in half. So if that were true, like, and as bright as the moon is at night, by the time you landed on it, you would just be bathed in light that would kill anything, right? It would just scorch anything. It would be so bright if it was really 225,000 miles away. I forget the exact math to it all, but it's pretty obvious. Anyway, let's keep on trucking here. What do we got next?
Yeah, we got an interesting part here because now we actually are going to mention just what are some, competing alternative explanations, and you're probably the one to mention this first one, Brad. The biblical explanation.
Yeah, well, yeah, we won't go into any details on this, but there are, a few passages here and there, obviously a few in Genesis that talk about, the earth is separated, the waters are separated and the ground and the sky. And, there is one particular translation of the Bible, it does call the earth flat. It says different things in different Bibles. So, it's all been obviously messed with and translated in 1,000 different ways. But perhaps the biggest pushback to, well, of course, there's the firmament, right, which is what a lot of people think is accurate, as do I. And that's this idea that there's, basically something surrounding, like a dome or something over the earth. Not necessarily made out of matter or solid material, but something, like some sort of a field that prevents things from going in and out. And that's interesting because that goes along with a lot of what, a lot of the channeled material talks about. But, so it's everything in the Bible suggests a very different cosmology than what we've been taught. So you'd think for Christians, it would be easier to come around to this. And some do come around to it much more quickly. But there's that early childhood programming that says this is the right answer and that's not the right answer. So it's tricky. But when you really understand what's being said, it does appear that, this is the earth as we know it is a closed environment of some kind. And the whole idea that people have shot rockets out, 5 billion miles away is patently absurd when you stop and think about things for just a little while. But that's the biblical. So there's fights between, there was a fight between two pastors, a debate a couple months ago, and the flat earth pastor demolished the guy who was defending the globe. It wasn't even really a debate. And so it does appear that the preponderance of the evidence points to a cosmology of the earth much different from what we've been indoctrinated into. Any comments?
And yeah, I mean, you even said, okay, the idea that the rockets go this far is absurd. So it gets super challenging because if you do, say, aeronautical engineering or anything that's to do with atmosphere or space or something like that, we did calculations of rockets. One of our homework assignments was, calculate how much fuel, figure out the propulsive efficiency, blah, 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 figure out the speed, all this detail of a flight to the moon that's this far away. You look at all your math and you're like, I mean, it makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. But then you go look at the moon landing footage and you're like, well, that's fake.
Yeah, and I was talking
So
more
it's very
about
confusing.
the outer planetary things that they've sent out, Voyager and all these other things that, how in the world can they communicate back, in X amount of time, and how'd they get it all worked out? How come it always works? And, nothing ever fails. And
Oh, yeah.
it's and then they've got the Hubble thing taking pictures from a zillion miles away. And it just, I won't even talk about the propulsion thing. I know you think that works. I have a lot of questions about that, but it really is all open to debate and questionable at a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not you can build a rocket ship that carries enough fuel that is able to explode within the airframe, and that gives it propulsion in empty space against what I've seen how they say they can do it. But Eesh, I don't know. Seems tricky to say the least, but that's a a side matter. So nothing on the Bible
Okay.
then. Nothing else on the Bible.
Do you want to mention celestial body celestial body possibilities for these things? Like
Yeah, I guess I didn't
if
mention that
someone were like,
earlier.
well, what's the sun? What's the moon? What's the stars?
Right.
Etc.
So there's some interesting. Well, I'll do those in reverse order there. So the sun, it's an interesting. Again, we don't have all the answers. There's a lot of different explanations. There's a video out there from a supposed Freemason that says the sun's 3,200 miles away or 3,300 miles away and 32 miles across. Same with the moon, and whether or not that's true or not is debatable. But that the Freemason have the 322 number and the 33 number, so there's a little bit of that built into that probably. Rudolf Steiner has said that the sun, it's not a thing. He called it a lacuna. He said if we accept the explanation that space is a vacuum, a void, right? It's completely empty. And he said this, you would say the sun is less than that. It's actually basically anti-space. And he called it a lacuna or a gap, effectively from another dimension. And what we see as the sun is a small, tiny pinprick of light coming through that dimension. And he didn't suggest this, but other people have suggested, and I've seen some interesting videos. And for those of you who've ever did the ant micros sorry, what do you call the magnifying glass, right? Where you try to use the sun and they try to kill an ant. I never tried that, but a lot of people understand or have seen that before. But it's similar. I've seen people like with a big glass bowl, maybe 3 feet or a meter around, and they'll put it over a model they build of the flat Earth, and then they'll walk around it with a light, like a big wide flashlight, and you can see when all the light, excuse me, when it hits the glass shield over the flat Earth model, it comes down to a little small point, and it looks exactly like what's the sun looks like to us during the day. So that's my
Yeah,
speculation.
like the explanation goes beyond just like you expect, well, that it's just going to be as simple as like, well, there's a point source of energy moving around above the Earth, but it could be even more complex than that.
Yeah, it's up in the air, and like I said, what doesn't make sense is gas congealing and forming a giant ball of burning hydrogen. We can't reproduce that in this world, and with our physics on this planet, gas expands when you put it in a place, right? It doesn't contract, but we're to believe that there's a magnetic core and a whatever
Well,
hydrogen
gravity
core. Yeah,
keeps it all together, mate. Gravity.
but
We ain't got no graviton, but there's gravity.
yeah, but it doesn't do
Keeps
it
it together.
here. Once again, we can't do it here. Nobody can reproduce or simulate anything like that with gas, right? So another thing you got to believe.
Yeah, there's always an explanation, but there's always the weakness, right? Is always this thing is always pointing at the weaknesses. It's like, well, why can't you do it here? Oh, well, science, science, science. You know. Well, what
Right.
about this? Why can't that? It's like, oh, well, this science. And what about this thing here that doesn't make any sense? Well, science, science, right? Always something.
Sure, they have to.
But I
There
think
has
the
to be something.
weaknesses and the inabilities should be taken as something meaningful and not always to be just let off the hook by going, oh, well, I guess they're just evolving the science. It's like, nah, you don't have an answer. Like, you can't do it.
Well,
Stop just saying, oh, we're working on it. And because we're the scientists, we'll figure it out soon. And just admit that you don't have anything.
that's the the ultimate way people shift from the globe to flat Earth is the preponderance of the evidence. It's like, well, that's questionable. That's questionable. This makes sense. This
Right.
doesn't make sense. And you start when your list of points for the flat Earth versus the globe Earth are 100 to 1. You start to go, well, maybe there's something to this. And this is just yet
Right.
another one. The moon is
It
another.
happens before you can fully explain it. It's more that all the doubt and the shade that is being cast on the globe model that makes you go, well, geez, I mean, this does not hold up anywhere near what I'd previously thought it does. I thought it was like perfectly scientifically explained, but there's like a bazillion holes in it.
Right.
You don't even have a graviton. You don't even have a cause of gravity, and your whole model's based on gravity. Come on.
right? Right. Someone found it was interesting. Someone found a book that had Newton. Not that Newtonian gravity is at play as much as Einsteinian gravity in this cosmological model, but they found a quote that it's kind of was like scrubbed out of a book, but there was an old copy, and Newton had said he uh, retracted his ideas about gravity completely. Said he was totally wrong. So whether or not that's true or not, I don't know, but
Wow.
thought that was interesting. But yeah, I mean, that's always, they're always going to come to that one. Speed of light, gravity, can't prove any of it. None of it's true, but they hang tight to it. And that's what we all learned. So the moon, what about the moon? Yeah, this is a harder uh, thing to talk about. There is Rudolf Steiner. Again, I go to him because he's talked about this stuff more than anybody else in a way that you won't hear anywhere else. Suggested that at one time, long, long ago, the sun and the moon and the earth were all one body. They weren't, or one thing. They weren't separate. And the sun eventually, he calls it old sun and new sun, moved away somehow, and that was the cause of what I believe was what they called the vapor canopy, and this is the flood, right there. That the Steiner talked about how the Earth was surrounded in fog, basically in the beginning, a mist, if you will. And one day that mist went away, and of course, there's all the flood stories from multiple different cultures. So that's theoretically that makes a little bit of sense as to when that happened. And then he talks about the Earth, the moon also moving away, and basically that then supported the fully individualized body, if you will, the physical body that we call ourselves today. And before that, it wasn't as strong a hold on it. Didn't have that strong a hold on us, right? Like we still had a spiritual sense of things. Like that was our real identity. But then when the moon shifted into its position, then we slowly lost that awareness and became totally material and physically focused, which is interesting, So this is all speculative. So I'm not saying, oh yeah, this is right. Replace the model with these answers, because I think they're more difficult to come to terms with than what we've been told. Obviously, interestingly, there's a scientist in the 1960s. Gosh, and I think the interview was in Australia, but he was it was right before, it was during the Apollo missions, and it was before we had officially landed on the moon. And he was saying, no one's going to land on the moon. He's like, the moon is a plasma, and he went into this long, detailed description of how it's not a solid body and it's not made out of rock or anything like that. And he said it's very obvious. We all understand it. And in my department that has the whatever does this type of research, and it's only a matter of time before this information gets out. So it was really interesting to hear that guy. It's a pretty popular interview that gets passed around. So he suggests it's a plasma. Other people suggest it's gases that form things. And one of the big points about the moon is that all the craters have like the same. If you were to imagine, we've been told, of course, that the moon's been hit by millions of meteors and comets, and that's why all the craters are there. But
And if I can just mention, like, I had this on my mind as well. Like, the tough thing about it is when you look at it through a telescope, it really looks like craters.
Sure.
Like, it looks exactly like craters.
Well, that's because what we've been taught, right? We all learned that crater thing, right? We got taught that in kindergarten, first grade. So yeah,
Well, I suppose that is your um belief imprint of what a crater looks like. They'll like show you the moon and be like, that's what a crater looks like.
yeah, exactly.
So maybe that's why they look so much like craters. Because
Yeah,
you already believe that things on the moon are craters, so that's why they look like craters.
that's right. That's our first introduction to craters, exactly. And but the point people are making now is that all the impacts come from the same angle. So it's like the moon should have the craters should be from a million different angles, right? They should all have different angle of disturbance or whatever, but they're all identically the same. Like they've been hit from the exact
Oh,
same
really?
direction. Yeah,
I'll have to take a look at that. That's interesting.
that is. Anyway, so and I said to my niece, she did a school project, and she knew I was gonna give her some fun material, and I said, the light is not a rock, it's a light, and that lit up her classroom and her teacher, and everybody was talking about it for weeks
You
apparently. So
ruined
maybe
the game.
right, maybe it is a light,
You
or is it a
spoiled all the
plasma?
fun.
But the well, all right, we got one more thing. So the stars, yeah. So heard a couple different things about the stars. Some people suggest they're angels or light beings or groups of consciousness entities as one suggestion for some of the stars. I think what's even more interesting is the I forget the name of the Indian tribe, a Native American tribe here in America, but their lore is that it's the path of souls. It's what they call the stars and the Milky Way and so forth. And they have a pretty precise layout of after you die, you go over here to this area, and then when you graduate there, you go to this area, and you move all the way. The only thing I remember for sure is that the last star you end up in before you go on to the next dimension or wherever is Deneb, is the final stop. So it's effectively souls working their way back towards the creator, is what they say. And that's, you know, ancient lore from these Native American tribes that, greatly predates our Western indoctrination. So that's interesting. What do you think about that?
Uh, yeah. Um, I don't have any thoughts on that. I just wanted to ask, how are we on time?
Yeah, we got about 10. I think we're doing okay. I'll
Because
breeze.
there's a bunch of other things. Maybe just breeze through them, and then we mentioned this interesting one here, mass belief. I think that's pretty juicy.
Got it. Comets and meteors. So yeah, why don't they come from below, right? So why don't we see a comet coming from the horizon and going up? They're always coming from high to low. If we're a ball floating in space, we should see them coming from all different directions. That's the only one there. Rainbows quickly. This worked on one or two people that went, oh, so that the suggestion is that it's a reflection off of the firmament or the dome. That's what they are when water and sun are mixing. Thunder's an interesting one. It's an echo. And a couple of guys have gone in and popped some balloons in some like nuclear reactors that are abandoned, and it sounds exactly like thunder because you can hear the sound of the pop balloon echoing as it rises up through the big nuclear reactor. So that's interesting.
I'd
Planets,
have
of
to
course.
pull you up on the rainbow one though. Even though we don't have much time, I'd have to pull you up on that and say, well, if you say it requires a dome or something like that, well, why can't I create a rainbow with my garden hose in my front yard?
It's just a reflection, effectively.
Off
But
what?
yeah, just the way things are shaped and built. I don't know. I don't have the answer. Um,
Right. And I think that's important to point out here. Like we're offering things as possible alternatives here, where neither of us are like, you know, have this is what it is. This is definitely what it is. And I hope that's why people like this podcast.
yeah,
Really.
we're not trying to do any of that. Right. So the planets, those were called wandering stars for the up until 1900 or so. A lot of people don't realize that most of this indoctrination kicks in the 20th century. There were, a lot of people think that we've known the Earth is flat for 2,000 years, which is totally not true. And every culture and tradition that we have, writings and artwork and things from all are show a flat Earth. Interestingly enough, and the whole realm that we call the Earth, and it looks nothing like what we've been taught. So this idea only came around recently. So we'll just galaxies and universe. We'll skip all that. We're just going further and further into speculative mode. But suffice it to say, doesn't appear things are as they seem. What's next?
The possible this is the wild one, or maybe it's not so wild. Maybe other things are more wild.
Oh
That
yeah,
mass belief causes or creates reality.
right. Well, that's what if you go to a lot of the channeled resources, that's what they suggest, right? It's your own personal beliefs create your individual reality, but our collective beliefs create the picture, the reality molds to the mass belief system. So if that were true, then the Earth could be anything. And I've heard a few channels ask this question, and is the Earth flat or is it a globe? And the most common answer I hear is it's both and neither. So
I
maybe
still don't
that's
know what that's supposed to mean, but it
yeah,
always sounds funny.
it does, right? I think it leaves it open to a lot of different speculation. But that doesn't mean that the globe model we've been taught is accurate by any stretch of the imagination. But I think it means it could be that the realm we're in, right, like some kind of a magnetic realm that holds things in place, right, is it in and of itself in some kind of a sphere of some kind. But the thing we're walking around on, right, these continents and so forth, are clearly on a flat plane. No question about that, in my opinion. But that's a crazy idea, isn't it?
Is it?
Well, if reality is really just a matter of belief, then that's pretty doggone interesting, isn't it? Especially
Well,
if it
it could be interesting that previously, before the Greeks made the assumptions that it was a globe and then did some math based on that assumption to show that it was a globe. 100% true. Do the math yourself. Don't argue with me. I've done the math myself. You go do it. And then I'm not speaking to you, Brad. I'm speaking to the viewer, any skeptical viewer. People believe the Earth was flat, and then they shifted, and we believe it's a globe. But maybe now we'll shift and we'll believe it's flat, and then everything will seem in that way. Be like it'll just make perfect sense, and then maybe in a millennia or something, we'll shift and we'll believe it's something else.
it's going to change before then. But yeah, that's absolutely right. And some people suggest it's an infinite plane, by the way. So there's no
And
end to
infinite
it.
what?
Infinite plane. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah. Sure.
just as long as we keep believing we're moving in some direction, things will continue to be produced. I mean, it's another crazy, out there idea, but why not, right?
Well, my fantasy is that it is at least maybe not infinite, but bigger, right? And there is actually an ice wall, and that one day we'll fly over that ice wall and we'll go to these other continents. Yeah.
yeah.
Like
Did we mention that, by the
that'd
way?
just be the sickest thing ever.
I don't know if we mentioned
That'd
that,
be the
but
coolest thing.
there's a book called The Iron Republic, and there's a few other books, and there's an old map from a Zen Buddhist temple in Japan that was published in the Honolulu Inquirer or Advertiser back in 1902, I think. And it shows what we know of as the six main continents that where people live basically here. And then it shows a ring around those continents with a few little gaps, like a few holes in it.
Yeah, I've seen.
And then it shows another 50 to 100 continents outside of that ring. And there was a guy who wrote a book late 1800s, early 1900s. It's called The Iron Republic. It's interesting. I mean, you could say it's fiction, but effectively he was a failed politician and humiliated himself, but had a nice inheritance from his family. So he took all his money, bought gold in a big ship and hired a crew and went sailing. He was just going to sail around the world the rest of his life, and somehow missed his spots and ended up going through the Antarctic ring. Right, and then ended up on a continent a couple of weeks later that they called themselves the Iron Republic.
That sounds so cool.
Believe it or not, right? Just another thing that you have to believe, but it makes a lot of sense. And there are millions of well, not millions, there are dozens and dozens of videos of the ice wall. And it's a known fact that
it certainly is an ice wall. There's no doubt about that. When you look at it, you're like, that is an ice wall.
Right. Yeah. Your boat's, hundreds of feet down, and there's this huge wall, and there, you just see miles and miles and miles of it. And it's, it's also the highest continent on Earth. I think that, 8,000 feet above sea level is what Antarctica is listed as. So you start thinking about things a little bit, and you're like, gosh, this is interesting. Anyway, we're getting close to the end here. What do we got? Food for thought. We're going to do this.
Yeah. Maybe some miscellany here that you want to fly through, and then we'll close.
Miscellany. Yeah, I did this one already. We've never seen light travel an infinite distance. We can't reproduce that no matter what we produce here. So there's another assumption, right? That this light just goes on forever and ever in the not vacuum of space, which they can't prove either. There's the vacuum meeting the non-vacuum. This is one of the favorite of Jaronism guy, who they even got somebody, I think they've got a guy, an insider at a some kind of physics lab that's going to do an experiment for them here one of these days to show that anytime you have any substance, gas, if you will, right? So a non-vacuum, and you introduce it to a vacuum, they immediately equalize. There's just no two ways about it. So why doesn't, of course, all the Earth's atmosphere vanish into the vacuum of space and so on and so forth? It's not, doesn't make any sense, right? It should continue to equalize until everything's in equilibrium. But yet another experiment nobody can pull off here to prove that's true. This is my biggest one is Dave Weiss, who's otherwise known as Flat Earth Dave, who's probably the biggest flat Earth proponent out there. He runs an app for phones and so forth. The Flat Earth, Moon, Sun, and Zodiac, I think is what it's called.
Sounds cool.
But he's been offering 3 Bitcoin for one single proof that the Earth is either A, a globe, or B, it's moving. So curvature or movement. Just one scientific proof, right? You got to be able to reproduce it and show this is how we know the Earth's a globe. And that reward's been out there for 5 years, I'd guess. And, you know, as of right this minute, last time I checked, Bitcoin was at its all-time high of like $73,000 when I looked at it the other day. So that's what, $226,000 worth of cash.
Right.
Why aren't the astrophysicists and professors and NASA employees all lining up to collect that money so they can donate it to a good charity at a minimum? It's never happened.
And the immediate objection to that would be, oh, well, he's just going to refuse it. But yeah, we have a legal system, right? They
Well,
could take him to court.
if that
So I don't think
happened,
it's a valid objection.
it's a terrible objection, because if that happened, that guy who got it refused would tell everybody. He'd go onto the other flat Earth podcasts and he would say, I have the scientific experiment. Here it is. And Dave Weiss
Right.
turned me down. And every single flat earther would be like, well, Dave, you better honor this or you know, it's all going to fall apart. So it would end the one. Just, it's amazing. All the evidence you have against the globe that they have, and it's just mountains of evidence. If there were someone could just produce one scientific experiment, and you'd think there would be dozens of experiments that would prove curvature, that the Earth is moving. But all it's going to take is one, and then the whole thing would be over. It would just completely collapse. But no one's done it. You'd think Neil deGrasse Tyson could do it, right? Just to get everyone off the hump, end the flat Earth thing, and just go, here it is. Do this experiment, and this proves curvature or movement. But nobody's done it in 5 years. So that's pretty doggone fascinating to me. So
All right.
that was that section.
Well, we might move into the close here. And my close would be to just bring up where we started in the episode last week, which is that you have to accept that you believe in the globe. I don't care if you believe that it's flat or whatever. I don't care what you believe. But at least admit that given all of this evidence that is completely unchecked and all of these holes in the scientific model, the absence of a graviton, the lack of footage of Antarctica, the fact that when ships go over the horizon, you can zoom in and see them again. Okay, there's holes in it, right? So by accepting it despite the holes, just admit that you believe it, and please stop saying that you know that it's a globe.
That's a hard thing to do.
Only request.
Yeah. We have melded belief in the knowing with a million different things. So it's natural that people do that today. But yeah, the point's well taken that, you know, if you can at least begin with, okay, I definitely don't know that whether it's flat or round, but I know I believe that it's a globe. That's a good start, right? At least that get you out of the cognitive dissonance mode a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be fine with that. Like, I don't want, go ahead, believe it's a globe, but just at least know you believe that it's a globe. That's cool. I don't even really care either way. Like, my mission isn't to convince people of certain facts.
Well,
I just want you to know the difference between knowing and believing.
No, and nobody's going to get turned around after a couple podcasts, right? Only the people that care a little bit are going to go and try to prove Brad and Matt wrong, or try to prove the bigger guys wrong, or win the 3 Bitcoin, right? Which we say all the power to you. What we found is that everybody who goes and spends a little time doing some research becomes a flat earther without exception. So that's what you have to look for.
And I wouldn't call myself a flat earther, by the way. I don't identify as a flat earther.
Gotcha.
I'm just not a globe earther anymore.
I'm a man and nothing more. How about that? A little
Radio.
legal
I'll
overlay
take
for
that
you
one as
there.
well. Just a man.
Yeah. So those last 2 points. Yeah, I think, for those that are mildly uncomfortable with all of this, I think the good news is I don't think we're ever going to have all these answers. Certainly not going to have all this alleged answers that we think we have today from the Globers. And I think that's okay. It's all right. We don't need to know how far away the sun is or how many light years Alpha Centauri is away from us. What advantage do we have for knowing that information? I don't think there's any. No benefits, right?
Don't know, there could be.
Could be, or maybe not. That's where I want to leave it.
Could
I
not be.
think a lot of the flat earthers have shifted to calling themselves true earthers, by the way, because there is so much stigma against flat earth. And them, like us, are first perfectly willing to admit that we don't have a lot of these answers. We just know what we've been told clearly isn't true. And that's kind of where we're
I
at.
do actually take issue with some of the flat earthers as well because they're is totally invested in their knowing as well. They're like, I know it's flat. Like, I know. I'm like,
Well,
well, not really.
we know with everything we can do with the limited amount of technology, money, and equipment that we have, everything, all the pictures and video that we can take, everything appears flat. Right? We
I
can't
agree
find
that it points to that.
right. So at a minimum, it's not the 25,000 mile around ball that they say it is, based on those pictures and videos.
Right.
So,
At this point, that seems the least likely to me.
well, that's impossible. What they've told us now is the Earth 100 times bigger? Then we have a new conversation, right?
Hmm.
The globe is actually 250,000 miles around instead of 25,000, and or whatever, or I guess that'd be
And we're just
2.5
like a little
million.
spot on it.
Yeah, right. The
And we just have a local sun
Australia
or
is a
something.
speck of dust on a 2.5 million mile around globe. That'd be a different subject.
Could be. Could be.
So yeah, so that's it. Any last comments or questions?
Let's just mention how good Take Your Power Back is.
Oh, all right. It's pretty good. We're working on beefing it up here a little bit in the next few months, but it's still out there and available, and we're gonna add some nice modules to it. So it's going to reflect the current state of things, which is that energies are accelerating, and it's a good time to take your power back before potentially lose it for a long time. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we don't mention how good you will begin to feel as you go through this course. Like, this course will clear out so much trash. Like, all the stuff that people are going to psychologists for and going to see their doctor for or something like that. You do the Take Your Power Back course. It's going to make bigger impact than anything you've ever seen before.
That's right. You're just going to
Take a
you're
look on
going
the
to
website, mindblowenzone.com. Just look around. We got this awesome video that introduces it. It's very cool. You'll like it.
the way I've been summarizing it lately with people is that you're going to move from what you call your normal state today back to your natural state. Your normal state is fear, judgment, beliefs, concepts, ideas that are not true. And your natural state is you have just a perfect radar on all the things you once believed and that they don't really come into play. And as you do that, the world just lights up. It's incredible.
Right. Yeah, it's like fear, judgment, and beliefs that came from external authorities toward uh natural, empowered, calm, blissful living.
Right. The way it should have always been, but wasn't. That's right. It's the movement back to your natural state. Anyway, take your power back. So
Alrighty.
thanks for joining everybody, and Matt, thanks for your contributions and inquisitive questions as always. Sorry I didn't go into detail on rainbows, but we'll do that another day maybe.
Okie dokie.
So Thanks again, everybody.
Good
We'll see
episode.
you. We'll see you next week. Yep. Hope everybody enjoys it, and we'll certainly answer questions. By the way, I wanted to mention that I'm going to slap in a few resources at the bottom of both of these podcasts for good flat Earth researchers, if anybody's curious. So those will be in the description notes.
Okay.
Almost forgot that. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next week. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.